I just wanted to welcome everyone to the 18th annual Bend Film Fest. I'm excited today to talk with one of our filmmakers. My name is Alicia Vickery. I'm a local Bendite. I'm also an educator and a mom. So I really found the film. It's called Chasing Childhood. And I'm going to have the filmmaker introduce herself. We've got Margaret here, and unfortunately we don't have Eden, who also worked on the film, but this is a great documentary series that I really enjoy. I just finished school myself, and like I said, I'm a mom and an educator. And Margaret, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself and where you
Sure.
are right now. She's in New York and we're in Oregon, so we just thought we'd have a casual conversation about your awesome and really enlightening and thoughtful movie.
Sure. So my name is Margaret Munzer-Loeb. I co-directed this film with my friend who I've known for many years, Eden. We are lifelong New Yorkers, although we lived together in Los Angeles for a few years. And Eden has worked as a producer on many films, and I had worked in film for most of my 20s and then actually went to social work school to become a clinician and ended up kind of having 3 kids, getting involved in a lot of other things, like many moms, frankly, and as a volunteer, and kind of wanted to get back into film. And we found ourselves making this particular film because we were recognizing that we were raising our own kids very differently than the way we were raised in New York in the 70s and 80s, where we had an enormous amount of freedom. And frankly, our parents were not very involved in our day-to-day life. And I'm pretty close with my parents. So I would say we were wondering, like, why don't they walk to school? Why do we get a zillion emails from school? All kinds of things. And we were like, is this just New York? Is it in New York? New York was this pedestrian city, and it used to be so much more dangerous because we heard a lot of, oh, things are different now. So we sort of set out kind of just based on a conversation, an idea to see what had changed, and really started out in New York, and ended up speaking to so many people and realized this was not just a New York issue. Something had changed in the way we were conceiving of childhood and adult involvement, and what kids could do and what was safe and what wasn't safe, and how much pressure they should be under. That was kind of a huge cultural shift that happened. I would say that like got rolling sometime in the mid 80s, but really kind of took off much later than that, in terms of like this incredible amount of fear that people have. And that it was really everywhere. And we had to kind of conceive of, how do we tell this story? Who are the people that are trying to make change, and what's important? And recognizing that all parents are really trying to do the very best they can, and that it's hard. And we all really struggle when we see our kids suffering in any way. And those were some of the things. And we kind of, I think it made us want to hear experts tell us what the answers were, as if there was like one single answer. And we found some kernels along the way. But I don't think there's any silver bullet for a perfect childhood or healthy adulthood.
Right. And I like your approach about like modern parenting, because I think if we look at our parents' generation and before that, it's so different. And I'm constantly asking myself, am I doing it right? So I really appreciate the fact that you and Eden decided to kind of explore, because it is hard and there is no right answer. But I agree with you, simple things like playing outside, and and I really appreciated the fact that you were talking about kind of like mortgaging your child's, like their childhood, your kid's childhood. I really like the way you explored it's like we want to do what's right for our children, but that free play, like you said. I have so many students here too that I've known over the years that are getting tutored, they're playing sports, they're doing activities, they're learning French, they're traveling, and the kids are exhausted. So talk a little bit about that. It sounds like
Yeah, I think that one of the things I noticed when my kids were little, was I felt really pressured to help them find their thing.
Yes.
And nervous that if I didn't my son is here. I had people telling me if I did not sign up for the swim team by first grade when he was 6, which involved swimming with much older kids, going to different states on the weekends, and not that he was going to be a prodigy swimmer, but he could swim pretty well, that I was going to miss it, that I had to know now, or the chances of him ever being able to access that would be over. And we heard this a lot, like, you better decide you're going to be a hockey player at 3. And in the world of like physical things, it was even greater. Anything athletic, dance, people feel like they have to get in, and they have to get in at a certain level. And I think that that's really new. I don't recall that ever happening in my childhood. Kids kind of played some. In New York, we had things like champions and some sports, and most kids played on 3 different teams. And we learned that, I'll just say, like, for sports, we really learned that there's a whole world of repetitive sports injuries that pediatricians are seeing that they never saw decades ago, because kids didn't play only one sport. And like, there's a whole world of, most professional athletes didn't play only one sport, but like, people are actually selling this idea. It like catches on, and you see like the kid who's really good in 5th grade, and you're like, oh, but he started when he was 3.
Right.
So
right.
I kind of bought in, and then I was like, I had one daughter drop out of School of American Ballet, my son throwing a fit that he didn't want to swim. And like, I know there are kids who love it, and I don't feel like saying to them, like, you should stop. But I do feel like kids feel like a lot of pressure. And I tell the story, my 10-year-old said pretty recently, she said, Mommy, I haven't found my thing yet. And like, she's good at lots of things. And I was like, well, you've explored a lot, and that's really valuable. So you'll have, but like, this idea that if you haven't found a single passion, there's both, I think. And that you haven't found a single passion, and that you need to be good at it. Like, you need to play an instrument, you need to speak a language, you need to, like, there are these boxes that were like little resumes that have to check a bunch of boxes. Which again, that might be right for some kid, but it's definitely not right for all kids.
I hear you. I think so many kids, like you were saying, I've seen kids here too that, in the olden days, which I tend to call them, I don't feel like I'm that old, but you would just play soccer with the local, like for us, it was the Boys and Girls Club. That's who you played. Here it's Parks and Rec, I'm sure New York. And you would play, but now there's all the like select teams and the traveling teams. And I found myself as a parent too, getting caught up, like, my kid's not into that. But I've also found too that, and you go over that in your film too, about the burnout. And like, I've seen kids that you think are on this trajectory to go to college and play soccer or be on the US ski team or wherever, and then they get to their senior year and they're done.
I mean, I would say because I have friends who are a little older than I am, I knew a bunch of people whose kids, I was like, wow, they're getting up and they're skating at 5:30 in the morning, and they really have it, and they're like, and I'd be like, I'd be really tired, like, and I really felt, and by 15 they were done. So this thing they thought that was going to carry them through high school, and then for those kids to look back and say, what do I like? Do I like to sew? Do I like ceramics? They actually didn't have as many of those things because they didn't have any time to do the exploring. And I think of free play as like the most is a version of exploration. So what what it feels like to enjoy things and struggle in real time. And you also learn to find what you like that's unmediated by adults. And, I've given this example numerous times, but really Genevieve, who's the mom in the film, says, we spend a lot of time thinking about, like, what if something goes wrong? What if you climb the tree and you fall? But we don't really think about, what if you never climb the tree? Like, what if you never try those things? And I think that that's really this pivotal point of what maybe Peter Gray is starting to see and Lenore is, there are things that kids have been doing for a really long time. And when you take them away, there are some like cognitive, social, emotional, along with just joy, but there are some skills that we need kids to build that we're actually, even though they've become highly specialized and amazing at certain things, but that they're not getting. And that some of those things may be linked to the kind of mental health picture that we're seeing later on in some kids.
Well, and I think talking about that, I love, it's so interesting because I remember that mom. I feel like I remember watching the Today Show, or I think it was the Today Show, right? When she got all that flack for putting her son.
Oh, Lenore, yeah.
Yeah, Lenore. And I was like, I can see both sides of it, but it's like he was safe. And I love the fact that he wanted to explore with a map and ride the subway. And what an interesting conversation with her. And talking to her son too, I thought was interesting. How did that come about?
So she was our very first interview, and we actually spent time with a lot of other people that are unfortunately not in the film, but sort of definitely helped drive our process. She had met my husband, and he said, you have to meet this woman, Lenore. And she was very charismatic and a journalist herself and a mom, and had kind of been like, my God, he was fine. I'm standing on the other side. Like, if you meet her, you're like, this is not a mom who's like, do whatever you want to do. Like,
right.
She's like, and you have to like know in New York City, like when you do things like first with an adult, like when you ride that train, like hundreds of times with your parent, it's like, where you get on, where you get off. I mean, she almost doesn't say that, but having grown up here, it's like, you've done it a zillion times. It's pretty familiar. You might even see some of the same people like you would in your town. And there's so many people around. It's not like this. So I met her, we interviewed her, and then she had started this Let Grow with Peter Gray, who's in the film, and Jonathan Haidt, an author who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, who's a psychologist. And they were like, how can we take this to schools? How can we have an impact? How can we show that kids are more capable than their parents think they are at like basic independent tasks away from their parents? And that free play is one version of that. And, doing some chores, walking to school, maybe walking with a friend, how can we move along the milestones that we had when we were kids, that we were sort of, it was like, okay, you're 10 now. My mom took me to the corner. She showed me what bus I was going to get on.
Yeah.
There were a zillion other kids on the bus. It was a public New York transportation.
Right.
I didn't have a phone to call her on the other side, which I would probably require of my child now, but
I know,
and
a little bit, you're right.
Yeah. But there was, and so one of the things I would always say is like, when I did that, the bus was filled with other children. And so one of the things we learned, Edna and I, was like, which Lenore was a part of, was you can't, like, doing things one family at a time, like being the mom who's like, I'm going to do this all differently. Like, none of us really, it takes a lot to be that person. It took a lot to be Lenore. Like, I was like, I want to be a part of a shared cultural shift. I want my kid to feel like in the norm of what's going on, not that he had an entirely different childhood than everybody else.
I like that, a shared cultural shift. What do you think, COVID has thrown, we were talking just briefly before we started recording, but, I found, I felt shamed a little bit because during COVID, I was not baking cookies. I was right. Not learning how to knit. I wasn't doing all those things. I felt like, but at the same time, I was very present. Right. And I found that my children were more present. And I'm wondering what you thought after making this film and then thinking about how COVID has shifted families. We were all kind of, well, as you know, we were all kind of stuck at home and doing things more simple. Do you think that maybe that helped in this concept you guys have talked about? Or
I think there was like a kind of both and, or like to some degree, kids got bored, and depending on who you were and where you were and what access you had to the outdoors, there was an uptick for many communities in free play. Even here in New York City, there were streets in Harlem, for instance, and throwing that out because I know these streets, where the neighborhood got together and they created streets, cordoned off streets of play. And, used to see a lot of that even in my childhood, where kids would kind of take over the city blocks and play outside. And, and so I think that in some ways, kids couldn't be so programmed. You did see kids participating in chores more, playing outside, maybe climbing the trees, maybe being able to play with a certain group of neighbors outside, because that was, eventually seen as the safer thing, playing outdoors. A lot of kids rode bikes that never rode bikes before.
Right.
It just actually happened. Like, this parents were so afraid of riding bikes, but then that became like a COVID safe activity. So,
Right.
in the risk budget, that was more safe.
Yeah.
So I think that's true. I think what happened with COVID, like anything else, like, you talk about these muscles that need to develop, but they also can atrophy. Kids got less used to following rules in the context of a school around a lot of other kids. And for some kids, that's been a difficult transition. And they got really used to their parents being around all the time.
Certainly. And technology,
And technology.
and technology, that's been tricky. And I know that, part of this film, what you talked about too, is just, big part now in education is the SEL piece, the social and emotional learning. And I do agree with what a lot of you're saying in that film is with all of this kind of program, this highly structured, overbooked childhood comes a lot of anxiety. And I see it, I've been teaching, this is my 18th year of teaching, and I've only see it get more and more. And it's heartbreaking, but it's tricky as a parent. Like you said, we're all doing the best we can, and parenting is really hard. And we all come from different, ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic, but it transcends all of that. So
And there's another piece, I think the thing is in everything I do, I push back against black and white thinking. Like, technology can be really damaging, but it can be really amazing, right? Kids are having social conversations and it's connecting them to the world. Some kids need the outlets of sports and whatever, and that's where they find their people. Like, I think if we can listen more to the needs of our kids, and I don't mean listen by them tell us just what they want, but kind of we'd be in a better place. I think the technology piece is also really difficult because kids have learned to be on all the time. Like, if they're not responding to a text or a snap, they're doing something wrong. But if your mind is constantly feeling like you need to be like, it's very hard to ever have that feeling that I think anyone of our generation had, which is, I'm going to go in my room, I'm going to listen to some melancholy music, and no one's going to bother me for a couple of hours. Or they might knock on my door, but that's about all I'm going to get. And maybe I'll let my phone ring, and maybe I won't, but I'm not going to know who it is because I can't see who's calling.
yeah.
Or maybe it'll go to the answering machine or call, voicemail. But just that feeling, I don't know that it's very hard for them to ever experience that. They're even in transitions, they're in a car, they're on their device, so I can't say I'm an expert on all the things that does, but there's to some degree, then they get anxious when they don't have it.
Right.
And they think they're supposed to be doing something.
So when you were making this film, I mean, you talked to, I know you went to 3 different areas, you went to different school, you went to Manhattan, you were in New York, Connecticut, right?
And Long Island.
And Long Island. So you were finding the same situation happening everywhere. Do you see it changing? I mean, your hope for this movie is number one, that we all feel that
we started this several years ago, and there's been no shortage of articles on kind of giving credibility to this idea. And I think that doesn't mean, as long as kids are striving for a resume to get into top colleges, or the top college that they could get into, or even to have financial relief from what is a very overburdened, expensive system, as long as kids are doing that, there isn't as much wiggle room as there should be. And the schools are feeling, whether they're a public school, a charter, or an independent school, they feel pressure to show outcomes. And one of those outcomes is the list of colleges that their kids go to. And so as long as that's the system, which I understand. I feel empathy. I was on a school board for a really long time, that they're in a difficult bind. I think that colleges need to look at uh, character strengths as much as they look at some of these other components of what's on a kid's resume. And I would say if you were looking at things like grit and resilience and sociability and the ability to talk to all kinds of people, like other things, then I think that would really maybe benefit having some of these components be a part of childhood. Because what I hear from people on the college level, and certainly what Julie Lithcott-Hames was experiencing, is these kids with the most perfect resumes were getting to college and meeting their parents and starting. And again, I'm not speaking for every kid, but the percentage of kids that were having a very hard time kept increasing. And that was something I've like heard kind of repeatedly, including from this amazing psychologist at Georgetown, where we did a talk, who is studying how all the milestones in America with American kids have been pushed off, except for going away when they get to college. And so her hypothesis is, or she believes kids are reaching crisis at a lower threshold than prior generations, and that is caused by this delay in an autonomous milestones.
Yeah, I like I said, as an educator, I'm seeing it. I mean, part of my daily activity with my kids is learning how to calm the mind and mindfulness and learning how to breathe. And I don't think it could be any more relevant than it is right now. I really appreciate this movie because it reminds us that we're all in it together. And I know you're busy. I know you're a busy mom too. What are your hopes for this movie? Because I know that I just enjoyed it because I felt very validated, and that other people are having this conversation across the globe, really. I know you're on the East Coast, we're on the West Coast, but it's the same conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we've been asked to like be in Belgium and Turkey and Greece. So we have chosen to delay streaming this film on major platforms because we believe in doing a grassroots educational campaign at chasingchildhooddoc.com. You can learn more about it. We are in the process of scheduling, I don't know what they last was, 100 screenings. We've been in some schools, and we have been showing educators the film. And it's really about like setting forth conversations in different communities, and then potentially them coming up with what works for their community that is actionable, and I know that that's different places. Like some places really have the bandwidth to create things for their younger kids, like a play club after school, like Patchogue did, which is basically solves some of the childcare issues, but instead of having another craft or skill you learn, they kind of set it up. So they call them like they're almost like lifeguards, the people who, it's kind of like recess, but but it allows for more multi-age than most, lots of schools recess is kind of by grade. So, I mean, I just think it really depends. Or, I think people want ways to kind of, if they're in a community where kids can bike or walk to school or whatever it is, like maybe they're doing it together.
Right.
Maybe they're bringing in a Let Grow project like these sixth graders you saw doing, where they get to decide with their family something they can do that they're ready for. So I think it's a really like the reason we're doing that is because I really feel like that's, if you just if people just watch it, you're kind of left with, oh yeah, maybe I am being like that mom, but I don't really know how to do it any differently. Like that's really hard. So I feel like this is really enabling people to start to like, figure out little by little things they could do in their home or with their kids that might feel right for them. And also to even say to their kids, how are you feeling? Do you feel overscheduled?
Right.
I like
it when Lenore was asking the kids, like telling that she was like, how do you feel? I don't think kids, I think like you said earlier, we're just trying to do what we think is right. And so our children can tell us quite honestly how we're doing. And if they are feeling anxiety or if they just want to play and simply be. I just really appreciate the conversation, like you said. So, it's hard enough being a parent. And so for the film, for me, really, it's a good starting point for a great conversation.
I give you like, thank you. And another example, like, because I'm a pretty, I would say, fairly neurotic mother.
Again, I appreciate your honesty.
So, COVID and everything. And I'm like, so this weekend, my son, who's, 15, he was with a bunch of friends and this is New York City, but he was downtown. In New York City, we have something called city bikes, which is basically like you can get a bike somewhere and drop it off somewhere else.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was this great environmental initiative and we have bike lanes but he's like, yeah, we went downtown and we got city bikes and we biked home. And I was like, do I get upset that he didn't have a helmet on? Because I believe in helmets. Sure. Or do I like, that's pretty awesome. You're right. Like you did it, you figured it out. You went up the bike lane on 6th Avenue in the daytime. Like, would I tell people not to ride a bike without a helmet? No, that is not the message I want to be for the film. Yeah. But like that's a pretty great way to have been like, how can I get uptown? It's really inexpensive. I have endorphins now. I got some exercise. And I was like, okay, well done. Like I'm going to take, that was a good thing to do.
Yeah. Good job, Mom.
I mean, I just think everyone needs to know that with like all of these things, there's like, life has risks no matter what you do. And, I think the biggest argument in our film is that there are unintended consequences. And in this new wave of parenting, we didn't really assess what those consequences might have been. And there's opportunity in all kinds of incremental ways to hedge against that will be better for our kids and probably better for us if we realize
that's true.
Hey, you can go do your own homework. Like if you really have a problem, come ask me, but and if you really have a problem, like maybe you should tell your teacher if this is too hard for you, but like,
right. Take some of those things off our plate, I think is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you have to go, but so if people are interested, which I hope they are, because again, I probably want to watch the movie again. And I would love for the PTO here at my school to share it, be able to watch it. So do they, just like you said, go to chasingchildhood.com and can find out more information?
It's Chasing Childhood Doc, DOC. chasingchildhooddoc.com. Okay. And there is information on our impact campaign and screening tour and how to bring the film to your local community.
I love it. Well, it's always nice to like move forward with the conversation and not just, like you said, walk away with no,
we have articles and information and other stuff up there. So it's not just us, these like mom filmmakers, like telling
you mom filmmakers. I appreciate, especially because I know how hard it is being a mom, but also that you just created an awesome, awesome film. So did you want to say one more thing? I think I cut you off.
I just want to say, like, I have watched this in rough cuts with my children. And if you have the opportunity, I think my 10-year-old started watching pieces of this when she was 8. And she really benefited from those conversations with me. Like, Mom, you're being like that. Like, didn't you listen to your movie? Oh. I think I'm ready to do whatever. And then we had other people who watched with their kids in high school who said, you never asked me how I felt about da, 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 da. And it's not too late to have those conversations. So consider that this is a great conversation starter with your children.
Awesome. Well,
Margaret, and your spouse, whoever.
And your spouses, yes, whoever they are, because it's not just, it's everyone, right? It's your village. So it certainly takes a village. I know that. So, well, thank you very much. And please tell Eden, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet her.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And good luck with dinner and your son coming home from camp.
And thank you for being a teacher for so many years.
It is my pleasure. I love it. I love it. It's exhausting, just like parenting, but I love it. We love our kids, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And come out to the West Coast to the film festival sometime.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye. Margaret. Bye.